This week we're talking about the concept of justice, which is a term that comes up all the time in legal discourse. It's certainly something that comes up all the time in public discourse, but it's something that we all have a very different opinion as to what it actually means. And in fact, if we didn't all have very different opinions about what justice meant and didn't come from different perspectives, we wouldn't need a legal system. The legal system usually doesn't operate between people who want to do right and people who want to do wrong, although obviously that happens often. But it's usually between the groups of people who have different ideas of what the right thing to do is in the circumstances. So when people say we want justice, we demand justice, we need to dig under the surface of that and figure out, well, what are they actually claiming? And one of the things we talk about this week are different theories of justice. And the reason we study these theories of justice is to give us the appropriate tools to be able to distinguish and understand what people mean when they say that. So if someone is talking about a demand that in the interest of justice people be punished more harshly, then they're talking about retributive justice. It's not the same as someone who's talking about rehabilitation or who is talking about the good of the community. So that part of the course, it's very important to have a read and to get a grasp of those different theories. Moving forward, restorative justice and therapeutic justice is a very important concept at the moment, and it's informing a lot of our social changes, particularly around neighbourhood justice centres. And that's the idea that justice isn't necessarily an issue that's an ethical, a solely ethical or moral issue. It's that it's about a therapeutical or treatment, almost a medical model, and it's definitely informed by discourses of medicine and social work and sociology. And the idea that if you've got a problem, even if it's a problem of violence, then there are deep-seated other problems that need to be dealt with as well. And a justice system needs to balance those things out so that you're providing immediate justice solutions for the people who need something there, but you also are maintaining an eye on the big picture and understanding that a lot of issues around violence are require fixing some of the issues of poverty that underlie them. And a good example of that, I think, that one that particularly cogent in Sydney at the moment, and definitely has been in Melbourne, is street violence, and the way in which the regulation of liquor licensing and the way in which the regulation of public transport availability and even the regulation of taxi licenses can create a situation that creates more violence. It's a complex regulatory web that just because someone beats someone up outside a nightclub, the solution isn't necessarily something that's vested in those individuals. So, important stuff, and not, and I like to sort of reinforce this whenever we look at theory. There's a tendency to sort of drift off a bit when you look at theory and go, well, this is very abstract, and we're talking about the ancient Greeks, and we're talking about people in the 17th century. This is not relevant to what I do. But theory is a tool. It's part of your toolkit. It's something that actually lets you look at a problem from different perspectives and break through that situation where you've got two sets of parties. One who says, I want justice. The other group says, I want justice as well. Now, I've given you a link to a documentary by Adam Curtis, The Way of All Flesh, which is a very interesting story where you've got two different sets of people who have very specific ideas of what they think is justice around the issue of intellectual property. And it's intellectual property in human tissue. And one group of people are obviously taking a very fundamental idea of justice that comes from the idea of humanness, what it is to be human. The other group, not surprisingly the people who are the property owners, are seeing justice in terms of property rights. Also in terms of, I guess, a utilitarian idea of justice that's about the outcomes that can be achieved, regardless of, hurting the feelings of individuals involved. Interesting situation, and interesting first of all because the different perspectives are so different, but also interesting because of the difficulty of providing a legal forum, let alone a legal solution to that problem. So I think you'll find that interesting. It's certainly a an interesting scenario that doesn't come up very often. The other thing, just in closing, that's important this week is to look at the different ways in which the legal system has responded to the ideas of access to justice. So the provision of alternative costing mechanisms, the provision of community legal centres, which are a very, very important part of our system and are under increasing threat from government cutbacks, and alternative dispute resolution, which is something which you will get some access to in training in as a lawyer. However, lawyers are not always the best people to run alternative dispute resolution processes. I'm letting you know that now. Particularly mediation, the mindset to be a mediator, the mindset to be a lawyer are quite different. And while a lot of lawyers go away and train as mediators, a lot of them are not very good mediators. You may not be in that situation, but mediation is a very, very different skill to what we're training you to do as lawyers. So it's worth knowing about it. It's worth knowing that there are alternatives available, but you can also realise that sometimes these alternatives are better to be referred to people who are specialists in those areas. So I guess one thing that's worth noting in closing about access to justice is that the topic used to be very much about poverty. So community legal centres, legal aid, a lot of our ideas of supporting and helping access to justice used to be all around the fact that the poor and the disadvantaged were cut out of the legal system. Times have changed, and now the middle classes are also cut out of the legal system. Average, ordinary, everyday people, everyday working class people, everyday middle class people are finding that the costs of legal services are exorbitant and unreachable. So we're in a situation where we have more and more need across the whole community for alternatives, for legal aid and for community legal centres, but paradoxically we're also seeing a situation where there's lesser public support for these ideas and more government cutbacks. And I guess it's a situation where it's one of those things that if you don't need it at the time, it's very easy to see it as someone else's problem. I don't want my tax money going to pay a bunch of people to get legal advice when I don't need it. But then when people find that they are in legal trouble and they do need legal help and they suddenly realise they can't afford those services, I think that they then realise what a problem this is. But often that gets deflected onto lawyers, and it's seen as lawyers are greedy. Lawyers who actually want to charge money for the time they spend helping me with my problem are the problem, because lawyers should somehow be providing everything for free, but I don't want my tax money paying for that service to go to others. It's this really kind of selfish, anti-communitarian mindset that informs this whole issue. So part, I think, then of our role as professional lawyers is to keep the community informed, to let people know that it's the people who are being cut out of the system. Yeah, and it is still bad that the disadvantaged and the working classes are cut off from the access to justice. But to reinforce this to people who are more comfortably well off, to say that you guys are vulnerable as well, because if things go wrong and you end up in long-term litigation, if you don't have a system of therapeutic justice that supports everyone, it won't support you either. So, interesting thought going forward.